Welcome back to the deep dive. For decades, we judged design purely on, well, on two things: how well it functioned and how sleek it looked.
hmm
If your app worked fast and had nice visuals, congratulations, you were a great designer.
And that era is it's completely over. We are stepping onto what our source material today calls the ethical battlefield of modern design.
An ethical battlefield, that's a strong way to put it.
It is, because function and aesthetics, they're now secondary considerations. The core metric, the absolute foundation for success has to be integrity.
So it's not about what you build, but how you build it.
And why? It means building ethical compliance into a product from the absolute ground up, which, as we're going to see today, often requires sacrificing, massive short-term profits for long-term moral certainty.
That is the mission today, then. We are taking a deep dive into the deeply personal and professional philosophy of Hayder Jawaheri, an experienced designer who's worked across industrial and digital fields for decades.
Right. We're unpacking his comprehensive framework, which he calls ethic by design.
And it sounds like this isn't just theory.
Oh, not at all. His framework is challenging because it's not just some philosophical exercise. It's a radical, practical proposal for how every designer must restructure their professional conduct.
So what are we getting into?
We are going to dissect his three core spheres of ethical responsibility: how the designer relates to themselves, to the client, and crucially, to the user.
Okay, self, client, user.
And then we'll look at his really radical proposals for ensuring accountability, particularly as we face these emerging challenges of AI and, deep fakes.
And what's fascinating to me right out of the gate is that Jawaheri doesn't treat ethical design as some new post-Facebook phenomenon. He roots it directly in the history of industrial design.
He does. He draws this straight line from his principles all the way back to Dieter Rams' iconic 10 principles for good design.
For those who might not know, Dieter Rams is basically the grandfather of modern minimalist design, right? The inspiration for a lot of early Apple stuff.
Exactly. And his principles they were truly revolutionary. They focused on longevity, environmental consciousness, and above all, honesty. Jawaheri particularly leans on that principle that good design is honest.
Honesty in design, what does that actually mean when you're talking about an app or a website? It's not like the color palette has to be truthful, right?
It means truth in function and transparency and intention. For Rams, it meant the product shouldn't try to make itself seem more innovative or valuable than it actually is.
No false promises.
Right, and Jawaheri just takes that baseline and applies it directly to the digital world. An honest digital product doesn't hide its intentions, it doesn't deceive the user about the data it's taking, and it absolutely doesn't condescend to the person using it.
So that transparency, that fairness, that's the ethical baseline.
That's it.
It makes a lot of sense. It feels like a return to treating software like a physical object. And the sources trace the very origin of digital design back to that exact moment.
They do. Back to the moment when digital products were being conceptualized using industrial design thinking, all the way back in the 1980s.
Really? That early?
Absolutely. Think about the early days of software, like the Windows Media Player. Jawaheri notes that designers were creating actual physical prototypes for the software skin.
So they were building models, like out of clay or plastic.
Yeah, they were modeling a tangible object that would represent the application. That was the conceptual bridge. They were treating a piece of code like a tangible product that required ergonomics, durability, and a clean interface.
So we start with this tangible product-based thinking where the ethical risks are pretty clear, like, is this chair going to break or is this toaster going to catch on fire?
Right, simple physical harm. But as the products dematerialized and became data-driven, the ethical risks just echo. They multiplied exponentially.
And that's where the trouble started.
Well, that mindset carried forward into the fierce competition we saw erupt in the late 1990s, particularly around 98, 99, when Windows and Apple were just battling so intensely for interface dominance.
That's when digital design really blew up into a competitive, profitable field?
It did, but the ethical framework just didn't keep pace with the technology.
Yeah.
We were still designing for function and for profit, not for integrity.
Okay, so let's unpack how we correct that imbalance. Jawaheri's framework is built around this tripartite model. You said a designer is constantly balancing three spheres of responsibility.
That's right. The self, the client, and the audience, or user.
And what I find so compelling is his point that these three areas are operating simultaneously and almost always they're in conflict with each other.
That's the core tension. That's the whole game. Ethical design isn't about solving one problem. It's about navigating this perpetual conflict.
Give me an example of that conflict.
Well, you can satisfy the client's financial goals, but in doing so, you betray the user's dignity. Or you can satisfy the user's need for simplicity, but then you find yourself betraying your own integrity by working for a fraudulent client. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation then, the internal sphere. The designer with themselves. This isn't about external rules, it's the internal battle, right?
It's all about self-knowledge and character development that has to happen before you can make any professional ethical commitment. He calls the designer's ethical character their signature or their fingerprint.
A signature, I like that. It implies something unique and personal.
And that signature isn't something you just learn in a boot camp. He's very clear on this. It takes 20 to 25 years to develop.
25 years. That's a huge ask in today's gig economy. It suggests ethics is fundamentally about experience, not just reading a book of principles.
Precisely. It is forged through trial, through error, through learning from, colossal mistakes, and constant, often really painful self-assessment.
And he's pretty candid about this part, isn't he?
Very. He explicitly mentions the humility required. He says something like, I might have been a cheat in the past, but where do I stand on this project now?
So you're not claiming to be a moral saint.
Not at all. You're recognizing that integrity is a verb. It requires relentless discipline and recommitment every single day on every single project.
And that relentless discipline, I imagine, defines the ultimate test of integrity.
Which is the willingness to walk away from a lot of money.
From massive profit.
It's the highest expression of that internal standard. The discipline to say, no, I will not do this, even if it pays for my house. And we have a fantastic, specific example here. His rejection of early involvement in NFTs.
Non-fungible tokens. Right, this was during the absolute height of the NFT boom. Everyone was rushing in, making millions. It felt like if you weren't involved, you were missing the boat.
The biggest financial opportunity of the decade, for sure. And he rejected it completely.
On what grounds?
He characterized NFTs as fundamentally unethical. He said they involved, and I'm quoting here, taking money from people for something worthless and laughing at them. He saw the whole system as pure, cynical financial speculation.
Just hype and manipulation.
Exactly. All relying on hype and propaganda to fleece, regular retail investors.
I can just imagine the internal pressure there, though. I mean, wasn't that wave riding potentially the easiest money he could have ever made?
That's the tension. That's the test. For Jawaheri, participating in that or riding any similar wave driven by hype or deception would have been a fundamental betrayal of his character.
A betrayal of that signature.
Right. The financial gain was meaningless compared to the professional shame he would carry.
So the goal of this internal standard isn't necessarily to save the world then. It's to save yourself from that professional shame.
I think that's a great way to put it. It ensures that the final project results in a good feeling for the audience, meaning they weren't tricked or left feeling foolish, but also, and this is critical, that the designer can stand by their work without moral regret.
And if you don't have that internal integrity,
then the other two spheres, client and user, are instantly compromised. You won't have the conviction to fight for the user against the client's profit motive because, well, your own motivation is already compromised.
Which brings us smoothly to that second sphere, the designer with the client. This is where that internal integrity gets immediately tested by the relentless reality of capitalism.
Right. The designer is tasked with balancing the client's interests, which are almost universally financial, with the user's welfare and their ethical treatment.
And the most common and intense battlefield for this conflict is UI/UX design.
Oh, absolutely. And the core ethical principle Jawaheri highlights here is beautifully simple, though it sounds completely counterintuitive for business.
What is it?
One less click is more ethical.
I love that. One less click is more ethical. Can you unpack why that saving of, a few seconds carries such ethical weight?
Because it respects the user's cognitive load and their time, which is their most valuable, non-renewable resource. Every unnecessary click, every forced pop-up, every confusing step, it's designed to generate frustration and mental fatigue.
So by reducing clicks, you get the user to their goal faster.
Faster, more efficiently, and without psychological stress, you are respecting them.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. From the client's perspective, the success metrics are often things like maximized screen time or higher click-through rates on ads. If a design is too efficient, it actually reduces the time the user spends looking at ads or clicking into content where the client can harvest more data.
You've just hit the nail on the head. That is the essential conflict in the digital age. Simplicity and user-friendliness, which are ethically superior because they benefit the user, can directly, immediately harm the client's short-term bottom line.
So what's the ethical designer supposed to do?
They have to persuasively argue that long-term trust, which is fostered by consistent efficiency and honesty, is infinitely more valuable than maximizing ad clicks today.
That requires immense courage, and I'd imagine the willingness to lose a project rather than compromise.
It does. And Jawaheri has a powerful case study for this very thing. His refusal to work on the proposed Persian social network, Sarush, back around 2007 or 2008.
Okay, tell me about this.
So this case is foundational to his philosophy. He was approached by IRE officials to develop this network. He presented a clear, comprehensive, and meticulously transparent proposal.
Outlining how it would operate ethically.
Exactly. How data would be handled, how user privacy would be guaranteed, all of it.
And what was the response?
His proposal was rejected, and he swiftly declined to work with the officials and founders, who he characterized as having a philosophy of theft and unethical intent from the very start.
A philosophy of theft. Wow.
He saw their core motivation was not to serve a community, but to extract resources or control information.
So that wasn't just walking away from a client. That sounds like a preemptive ethical strike against the entire foundational intent of the product.
It was. He predicted, and this is the key part, that any application built on that philosophy of theft would inevitably rely on deceitful practices.
Like what?
Things like deliberately addictive, gambling-like revenue models,
Yeah.
or leveraging misinformation and manipulation just to drive engagement. And we saw that come to fruition later in similar applications, like Rubica.
So he saw the writing on the wall.
He knew the foundational ethics were rotten, and he refused to build on a morally compromised slab. The price of that integrity was losing a major national-scale contract.
That takes a huge amount of foresight
Uh-huh.
and financial discipline.
Hmm.
But what about projects that start with good intentions but, run into flaws during development? How does the ethical designer handle those sunk costs?
That brings us to another powerful anecdote, which illustrates integrity with the client when development is already underway. This was his virtual reality architecture project in 2019.
Mhm.
He spent 6 months, a significant investment of time and resources, developing a sophisticated VR product. It was intended for architectural coordination, for complex engineering meetings.
6 months of R&D is a huge commitment. And the source mentions the data was massive, something like 400 gigabytes of high-precision environmental data. He was clearly invested.
Absolutely. The technical execution was flawless, but the ethical choice came when he evaluated the user experience. After extensive testing, he concluded the core concept was fundamentally flawed.
Not technically, though.
No, not technically, ergonomically and practically.
What was the flaw?
It was the headset. It weighed about 400 grams, and prolonged use, which was required for the long, detailed engineering meetings the product was designed for, caused immediate motion sickness and significant physical discomfort.
So it's just impractical, unusable for its intended purpose.
And physically burdensome for the intended user group. It failed a basic test of human dignity.
So what did he do? He had 6 months of work that he could have sold for serious money.
Well, despite the potential to sell the product for tens of thousands of euros, Jawaheri honestly told the client that the concept was ineffective and advised them to shut the project down immediately.
He chose the client's long-term success over his own short-term gain.
And the user's basic well-being, right? He prioritized that over his own immediate financial payout.
That's a huge lesson, not just for designers, but for business leaders. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can design is the cancellation of the project itself.
And that integrity was a strategic asset in the end. The client, seeing that level of honesty and financial self-denial, didn't just walk away. It earned Jawaheri deep, lasting trust.
So it led to more work.
It led to subsequent referrals to highly secure and complex projects. Ethical action, while costing short-term money, builds long-term, high-value reputation.
This is a perfect transition to the third sphere, the designer with the audience, or the user. If the first sphere is about character and the second is about conflict, the third seems to be all about respect.
Specifically, respecting human dignity and the user's right to privacy.
And Jawaheri establishes respecting human dignity as the absolute first principle here.
It's an imperative. You must not deceive, you must not manipulate, you must not condescend to the user. He states, treating the audience as fools is very unethical. When a product hides its intentions, or uses dark patterns, or uses manipulation to achieve a goal, even a benevolent one, it violates this fundamental dignity.
And the most pervasive violation of dignity in our current digital landscape is this ongoing privacy catastrophe.
Yeah, perpetuated by large tech companies. He is unsparing in his critique of platforms like Facebook, TikTok, and even what might seem like innocent applications, like Pokemon Go,
Which harvested immense amounts of location and personal data.
with often very opaque collection methods. The Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal from 2015 is the canonical example he uses, where user data was weaponized not just for profit, but to influence major political outcomes.
To undermine democratic processes.
But the underlying ethical failure, he says, is the privacy trap. He details the absurdity of it, the 125-page, tiny font terms of use that are legally binding, yet practically unreadable.
And users are forced to just click accept without comprehension.
It's manufactured consent. It's not real consent.
And what are the long-term consequences of that? I mean, we were just clicking yes to share a photo of our dinner or our cat years ago. What's the harm?
The consequence is the catastrophic dissolving of ownership boundaries. Jawaheri highlights that those simple photos shared years ago by billions of users have now been absorbed. That massive private data set, your life, your habits, your location history, has been used to train incredibly powerful AI models.
All without our informed consent or any compensation for the data we provided.
Exactly. The dignity violation is complete when the user realizes they funded the creation of technologies that might eventually be used against them.
So if that is the disaster we are trying to avoid, what is the clear rule for designers when it comes to data collection?
It's the minimal data principle. It's very simple. Ethical designers must collect only the minimum necessary data required to achieve the product's specific goal.
So if the app can work without my location history, it shouldn't ask for it.
It must not ask for it. Designers must vigorously avoid this unnecessary crowd data gathering, which, if not strictly necessary, just becomes a future liability or a tool for misuse.
That clarity is fantastic. Okay, so we've established the internal character foundation, the tension with the client, and the requirement for user dignity. Now let's see how these high-level mandates translate into tangible design choices.
Right, into principles rooted in simplicity, transparency, and truth.
And Jawaheri argues that these principles find their most natural application in minimalism.
In minimalist design philosophy, yeah. He sees minimalism as inherently ethical because it respects the user. It's fair, honest, and completely understandable.
Explain that connection for me. Why is less inherently more ethical?
Because minimal design strips away complexity. And complexity, it breeds confusion.
It can hide deception.
It can hide deception or ambiguity. And it leads to waste of time, waste of cognitive energy, waste of resources. A truly minimal design is maximally efficient in communicating its purpose and function. It eliminates every opportunity for the user to be tricked or confused.
So if the design is visually simple, the language must also be simple. We're talking about linguistic transparency here.
Absolutely. Especially in documentation and user agreements. Jawaheri argues that digital documentation should mirror the clarity of foundational legal texts, like constitutional law.
He specifically references the German Constitution.
He does. The first article, which focuses on human dignity and is remarkably simple and direct. The language must be free of specialized, philosophical, or overly complex jargon that only serves to confuse people.
It sounds like a rejection of, academic or corporate speak.
It is, and he takes this so seriously that he provides a great example of practicing what he preaches. He went to the extraordinary length of employing a German literature professor to simplify the copy on his own professional website.
A literature professor. That's not a typical web development expense. What was the goal there?
The goal wasn't just stylistic elegance. It was ensuring maximum clarity and absolute fidelity to the intended meaning. They wanted to eliminate any ambiguity.
So that there was no misunderstanding.
Right. It demonstrates that achieving true simplicity and transparency requires serious, dedicated effort, often from unexpected experts.
We see that dedication to radical simplicity in his professional work, too. I'm thinking of the GIS Metro project. The problem itself sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, it was a highly complex geographical information system problem. It was about developing metro tunnels in a major city, and specifically calculating the safe construction depth for buildings above those tunnels.
So you've got massive, layered data sets, geodata, structural calculations.
It's incredibly complex, and the typical engineering solution would involve multiple consultants, intricate software, and hours of complicated analysis just to determine the safe limit.
Okay, so what was his brilliantly simple solution?
Instead of a mountain of data and complex dashboards, he created a 1-meter cross-section viewer. An engineer could simply input coordinates, and the viewer would visually and instantly show the safe construction limit. Simple, direct, actionable.
That sounds like a brilliant piece of design. But you mentioned the simplicity was initially met with intense skepticism. Why would a quick, efficient solution be rejected?
They mistook elegance for worthlessness. They were geared up for a convoluted, hours-long presentation with technical jargon and complex formulas. They expected a solution that reflected the difficulty of the problem.
Because in many corporate and governmental cultures, complexity is equated with value and expertise.
Exactly. The ethical designer's duty to provide simplicity runs headfirst into the client's cultural bias for complexity. Jawaheri's design worked instantly, which threatened the entire bureaucratic structure built around that GIS system.
That's a masterclass in how practical design choices are inherently ethical. Now, stepping back from the interface, that honesty has to extend to the content itself, right? You can design an honest interface for dishonest content.
Precisely. Jawaheri asserts that a designer cannot ethically produce content they do not personally believe in or accept. If the content, be it text, image, or whatever contradicts your character, it becomes professionally indefensible.
Because you're consciously creating something that undermines your own standards of truth.
Exactly. And he provides a really sharp critique here of public intellectuals who violate this principle, citing the author Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Okay, what's the issue there?
Well, Jawaheri notes that Taleb writes these voluminous, often 500-page books like The Black Swan. Yet Taleb himself publicly argues that any book whose core ideas can be summarized in 10 pages is essentially worthless.
Ah, so the internal contradiction is the ethical manipulation.
Yes, Jawaheri suggests that Taleb's own lengthy books could easily be summarized in just 5 paragraphs. By creating unnecessary length and complexity, while simultaneously arguing against conciseness, he is manipulating the audience.
Making them believe the book's length is the same as its depth.
Right, it's an unethical manipulation of the reader's time and intelligence.
That moves beyond simple text to the profound power of cognitive design itself. The content we consume shapes our culture and our thoughts.
It does, and the example he uses here is startling. The song Wind of Change. Jawaheri references the history surrounding the song and how principles of cognitive design, the manipulation of thought through art, can be used even by intelligence agencies to engineer major political and cultural shifts.
That's a huge leap from an app's user flow to geopolitical messaging.
It is, but it demonstrates the vast scale of ethical responsibility. Design decisions, whether visual or cultural, carry profound ethical weight because they influence how people think, what they believe, and how they ultimately act.
That is a sobering thought, and it pushes us toward the need for external systems of control. Let's shift our focus now from personal principles to external oversight, accountability, and monitorability.
Okay, so accountability is the basic requirement. The designer has to own the effects and outcomes of their actions. But Jawaheri stresses that monitorability, or Nazara Paziri, is the crucial ethical step beyond simple accountability.
What's the key difference between accountability and monitorability?
Accountability is retrospective. You answer for what you did. Monitorability is proactive and systemic. It means the designer must build systems that provide users with the tools to monitor the product's performance, assess its impact, and provide feedback in real time.
So if a company is tracking my data, monitorability would mean I have a simple, always-on dashboard where I can see exactly what data is being collected and where it's being sent.
Precisely, without having to read a 125-page PDF. An ethical failure occurs when a company prevents this oversight. Failing to provide these tools means users can't check what's going on.
It's embedding transparency at the system level.
Yes, and this is especially vital, according to Jawaheri, for social innovation projects. Because in those projects, community feedback is the only valid check and balance against the designer's assumptions or the company's self-interest.
If you can't monitor it, you can't trust it.
That's it. And that lack of trust becomes the central crisis when we look to the near future, particularly with the massive rise of AI.
Right. Jawaheri identifies two massive ethical challenges looming over the next 5 to 10 years.
Driven by the collapse of privacy and the explosion of generative AI.
The first is the dictatorship of data.
Correct. This is where the enormous centralized mass of user data, all that crowd data we advised against collecting, is ultimately misused by powerful corporate or state entities. This requires intense, continuous vigilance.
And the second challenge is arguably more profound: The protection of reality and fighting fakes.
With AI-driven deepfakes, large language models generating endless plausible fiction and pervasive misinformation, the integrity of factual reality itself is at risk.
If users can no longer trust what they see or read, social cohesion just collapses.
It does.
Now, here is where I have to push back a little. To combat this systematic distortion, Jawaheri suggests the need for organizations akin to the Ministry of Truth from Orwell's 1984. Wait a minute, isn't the whole point of design ethics to avoid centralized authoritarian control over truth?
That's a critical question, and he uses the Orwellian term deliberately to highlight the tension. While Orwell's Ministry of Truth was designed to manipulate reality, Jawaheri is arguing that the need for an institution that safeguards factual reality against this technological flood of falsehoods is becoming urgent.
But doesn't giving any organization, even an ethical one, the mandate to safeguard factual truth just create a new, potentially a corrupted authority?
It raises that terrifying possibility. It's a technological paradox. To preserve freedom of thought, you must first preserve the objective reality upon which thought is based. And he believes designers have a massive role in creating the technical and ethical principles for this safeguarding system.
It's a very uncomfortable thought.
It is. It forces us to prioritize the survival of truth over maybe our ideological purity about centralized control.
We have another excellent case study here that connects the fight against unethical content directly to business viability: the closure of the Foreman.com social network.
Right, between 2008 and 2009. This demonstrates the price of that vigilance. Foreman.com was technically a huge success story. It was run by an Iranian team with servers in Indonesia, and it exploded 200,000 users in just 2 months.
So financially, it was on a rocket trajectory. What happened?
The momentum led to an ethical crisis. A prominent user began sharing hardcore pornographic content, and the team recognized that the platform, driven by user traffic, was rapidly pivoting toward becoming a Southeast Asian porn hub.
And their decision.
They shut it down.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. They consciously chose professional integrity and content standards over massive financial success and user growth. They saw where the momentum was leading and chose to kill the commercially viable product.
That is the ultimate proof of ethic by design in practice. It proves that the designer's internal standard can override everything else. But how do we make this systemic? You can't rely on every designer being a saint.
Exactly. Jawaheri recognizes that demanding this level of personal heroism from every designer under intense corporate pressure is just. It's unsustainable. Ethics is too complex for one person. It requires a dedicated, systemic oversight.
An ethical judiciary, as he puts it.
Yes, which is why he proposes the creation of an ethic design officer or a dedicated team in every major organization.
This is a radical structural proposal.
It is. This role has to function independently, like a judicial power within the company, with full access and authority delegated directly from the top. They need to be insulated from the immediate pressures of sales and marketing.
And what would their day-to-day job look like? They're not just moral cheerleaders.
No, their primary function is conducting ethical revisions. This involves using a detailed checklist to verify ethical compliance at every single stage of the project lifecycle, from initial concept all the way to launch.
And who should staff this ethical judiciary? Not just designers, I assume.
No, the team has to be interdisciplinary. It includes designers and engineers, of course, but also sociologists and psychologists who understand the cognitive and social impact of the product.
People who specialize in the ethical focus.
Right. To ensure the design doesn't cause harm to marginalized communities or exploit psychological vulnerabilities. The goal is to embed this team to mitigate catastrophic failures like Cambridge Analytica by integrating ethics from the base and foundation.
It shifts ethics from a PR problem to a proactive part of development.
Right.
Now, complementing this organizational solution, Jawaheri offers a very clever strategic defense for the individual designer: leveraging the law. He says law-abiding is ethical abiding.
This strategy is brilliant because it provides the designer with an objective, non-emotional shield. Fundamental ethical principles like human dignity, social welfare, fairness, they aren't just subjective opinions. They are enshrined in constitutional laws.
So instead of arguing subjective ethics, I feel like this is wrong, the designer can strategically argue for legal compliance.
I don't do this because it is illegal, and it violates the foundation of human dignity enshrined in our Constitution.
Exactly. It neutralizes the client's counter-argument of, we need this for profit. You're forcing management to reckon with concrete, non-negotiable legal consequences.
It makes the ethical argument much harder to dismiss.
It provides a robust and defensible argument against the profit-driven corporate machinery.
And finally, Jawaheri insists that ethic by design cannot be limited to the digital screen. It has to govern all physical environments and services as well.
This is where we see the concept truly broaden. Ethical design demands systems that respect women and caregivers, users who are often ignored in standard design processes.
He offers simple yet highly impactful examples. First, providing free sanitary pads or tampons in the workplace.
And the argument is straightforward. The cost to the company is negligible, but the act provides very high symbolic value to female employees. It promotes comfort, reduces workplace stress, boosts morale, and ultimately improves performance.
That is ethical design in the physical space. It is. And he also highlights the corporate design blind spot at Apple, one of the most revered design companies in the world, which initially failed to provide adequate maternal facilities for pregnant employees.
Things like dedicated parking or childcare.
He points out this failure wasn't malicious, but a classic design blind spot. The problem was only addressed after one of their own managers became pregnant and personally experienced the severe difficulty. It illustrates how design often fails those whose needs differ from the privileged majority.
A failure of empathy that is fundamentally unethical. But the most counterintuitive and compelling example, and one that beautifully ties ethical concern to measurable societal impact, comes from urban planning. Ethical snow removal.
This is such a powerful demonstration of how conventional, rational design can fail the ethical test. The conventional wisdom, driven by volume and efficiency, says that main roads should always be cleared first.
That sounds rational. You clear the biggest roads, you help the most people get to work.
Right. But an ethical revision demands that you look at diverse user needs. Jawaheri cites evidence showing that prioritizing snow removal on side streets used more by women, children, the elderly, and caregivers for essential daily tasks, results in a massive, measurable reduction in injuries, hospital visits, and general urban misery.
Wait, so the traditionally rational, volume-driven solution actually increases societal cost in broken bones and lost productivity?
Yes. While the ethical solution saves the community money and prevents suffering.
That's the definitive proof. An ethical perspective focused on human dignity and considering the most vulnerable users yields significant positive societal and economic impacts that conventional, rational design entirely misses.
Ethical design isn't just about feeling good, it's about optimizing for human welfare, which is ultimately the most efficient long-term economic strategy.
That's a profound realization that reframes this entire discussion.
So to synthesize this comprehensive framework for you, Hayder Jawaheri's ethic by design demands internal integrity, first and foremost.
Achieved through decades of personal discipline and the willingness to sacrifice profit.
Second, it requires transparent communication with the client, demanding efficiency. One less click is more ethical. And third, it demands respect for the user's dignity, enforced through the minimal data principle.
And the systemic solutions he puts forward are equally vital. The establishment of an independent, judicial-like, ethic design officer within every organization, and the strategic use of constitutional law as a concrete, non-negotiable ethical baseline.
Which brings us back to the most urgent challenge we identified, the critical need for the protection of reality against misinformation and fakes. If AI advances to a point where all information can be convincingly faked, the entire social contract based on shared reality starts to disintegrate.
And that raises the stakes exponentially.
So if the systems designers build must now become arbiters of truth systems that help the user trust the world around them, not just the product they are interacting with, what new revolutionary principles must be inscribed into the very code that runs society?
We need to stop designing for clicks and start designing for truth itself.
But how do you technically enforce reality? That's the challenge, waiting for the next generation of ethical architects.